And welcome back to A Businessman's Guide to Almost Everything, the show where I, your host, Kole Berzenji, get to sit down with interesting people from interesting sectors of the business world. We get to discuss about some of the ways that these businesses operate, some of their goals, what makes them tick, and some of the challenges they face. Today, I have with me Amanda May. Amanda, would you introduce yourself, where you're from, and what you do?
Sure. I'm Amanda May. I'm the executive director at the Lynden Heritage Museum here in Lynden.
All right. So today I wanted to go over some of the things that are going on in the industry.
Okay.
Now, museums aren't necessarily the same kind of industry as maybe insurances or video marketing, but I figure there are some things going on just across the country, within the state, that are affecting non-for-profits. And I'm sure you guys are feeling some of that.
Yes. Yes, we are. Volunteers is always a big thing. We run on volunteers. That's how we stay open. But in the country and technology related, there is a big change in how your message goes out, how it gets perceived, that you're being aware that you're telling the story correctly. And it's not a political ploy. It's not it's not trying to manipulate the message. It's being authentic. Like, how are we being authentic to where we are and where we live and the building that we're trying to represent?
Yeah. And this is kind of off topic, but like in the vein of that, I know there was a movie that was made, or I suppose documentary made about the town that we're in right now, Lynden. And it was during the time of the Black Lives Matter movement, I think during COVID.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, and it was a big deal. And a lot of people, like some of them got up in arms. Some of them were like, no, this is an important story. And it goes to show that it really does affect everyone in the cities, places like us.
Yeah, and preview is important. So when you announce what you're doing, it's usually, well, not usually, but it's usually a comment about why aren't you doing something else, or a snap judgment based on a preview or something like that. So
No, for sure. Well, let's start with a fun topic. Let's talk about the economy.
Oh,
famously fun.
Yeah.
So the economy for the last 4 years, depending on who you've been listening to, it is either the worst economy we've ever had, or it's the best economy we've ever had.
Sure.
I'll let the viewer decide. I don't know.
Subjective, I would say, because so many things can impact, right, what you believe is a successful year. It could be where you are in your job. Are you guys both working? Do you have kids? Do you have not kids? Do you have to buy like groceries 3 times a week, which can bankrupt you right now, it feels like. But for us, we really try to listen to the general core of what we hear in our community, right? If people are saying, man, we're really trying not to eat out and doing extra activities, we're trying to stay home more and all that kind of stuff, that tells us that we need to find more funding and make things less expensive or free. So we're still going to we can't not charge people to come in. We can't not do certain things, but we can make it more affordable for them to engage with us. So our open houses are free. We provide food and beverages. All of it is free. So a free family day of fun and other things that we'll do. So we just try to balance out what we know we need to participate in as a business and what we can do to give back.
So have you found that that's been the case for the last 4 years, that people who might be interested in the museum are just having a hard time bringing the family out just because they have to get that third run of groceries that week?
I think that it's different because the museum is not like going to a movie. And although education is really important to parents, it is a different interactive experience, one that probably not all kids are excited to do. We always have kids who are really happy to be in there once they kind of realize that there's lots to look at and we can engage them through activities and all this kind of stuff. But it's a lot easier to choose one or the other when we are a museum and we are less interactive versus choosing an activity that you know will easily distract and enjoy your kids for an hour and a half to 2 hours.
Right.
Even if you have to pay a little bit of money for that one, it's hard to compare them.
No, and it's certainly fair. And that's when you're in a hard economic time, people often have to make those decisions about what do we need and what's for pleasure.
Yeah.
And then when it comes to pleasure, they get picky and choosy and like, where do museums factor into that list? And it's a hard conversation.
It is. And that's why we have made a really big focus on the free engagement and the partnerships with local organizations. So the organizations will come into the museum and they'll do a free event, like the Whatcom County Dairy Ambassadors. They do readings once a month. They'll come in and they'll read books to kids, right, with an agricultural topic. But we get to participate in those activities, which are free, and they provide a service, but we still get to engage with our community.
Right.
And so making sure that in the years that we know, we don't want to have people choose. We want us to just be an easy choice to make regardless. And so we just have to make sure we have those opportunities available to them.
All right. So would you say that museums by and large, and perhaps this is too wide of a question because I know different museums are going through different things, but do you think museums are generally struggling in 2025?
So, yes. We are part of a museum organization and association that spans locally as well as all over the country. And we're not heavily involved with that. We don't go to the conferences or anything like that. But I do read a lot of the articles in the papers that they come up with in the forums of what other people are struggling with. And one of the things that does help me balance what we're doing is the fact that technology, information access, all that kind of stuff is things that they are also having a problem with. It's just a really weird transition. Kids can look at everything on their phone. How, without having them play a video game,
right?
How do you bring them in to the concept and immerse them in a way that you get their attention? So we're not the only ones. Bigger museums, obviously the funding is different because they might have more available. We're a local museum. We don't have a line on the federal budget like some do. We are very beneficial that we have city support and things like that, but our funding struggles will be different than theirs. We don't have galas. We're not the Smithsonian, those kind of things.
So can you describe a little bit about how the landscape that museums find themselves in has changed, maybe over the last 5 years or maybe over the last couple decades? Because we've had the internet come into reality since like 2012. That's been a main thing.
I think that it feels like what I hear is that people who are running exhibits, the personal connection part. So if it's a conversation about heritage and where we came from and where our area started with, and maybe like one of our goals is to bring the Nooksack cultural department from the tribal area in to do an exhibit with us. And things like that need to tell their story by them. Personally, we can still relate. We're still going to make a connection. Or maybe it's not them. Maybe it's agriculture. Well, I'm not going to tell the story. I want a farmer to come in and I want to connect with them because their story of their upbringing or memories is going to connect with other people. And I think really capturing those to get the intimate reactions from people are what everybody else is trying to do as well.
It does seem to be, again, I know it's like a political thing for a lot of folks, but during COVID, we had such a big emphasis on people telling stories that are their stories. Like the Native Americans tell the Native American stories. Black people get to tell the Black stories, which that's fine. Yeah. That's not actually that political of a take, I don't think.
No.
Do you find that it's hard to find people to tell those stories though?
I think that your approach to them initially is very important.
Gotcha.
Because the message and the goal of the museum is to be an accurate representation of the past. And if you're going in there with a different agenda, if you're going in there to be selective with information, if you're going in there to say, well, I only want you for this part, it doesn't play well. And it's not that's not what my job is. The story is the story. The past is the past. I might get to highlight certain pieces of the information, but it's not my job to choose what gets left out or what actually is the main part of that time period that we're talking about.
And you've not, like, obviously you have to play some role as curator, but you've never found an issue with balancing those interests, eh?
Maybe we're fortunate to where we are, that the stories tend to relay themselves in a agreeable way. I don't, so
and not to
there
say
might be things, but I also think that the people that we're working with, when they come in and they talk to us about topics, there's an understanding that you're trying to reach as much of a broad base as you can, because that's how you inform people.
And it's not to say that the stories are nice necessarily or cheery. It's just not unnecessarily, I suppose, controversial.
Well, it's the way that you tell it. I mean, you think of the books and the movies about, the war in Auschwitz and all that kind of stuff. You gain people's interest. They want to learn. They want to know more. And it's tragic. And yet at the same time, they do it in a very, what's the word I'm trying to say? Appropriate and meaningful way, regardless of the topic. And I think that if you have the right person trying to tell a story in a visual and verbal way, that can be achieved with anything. Even if it's tragic, if it's good, if it's heartbreaking, I don't think it matters. It's still going to be it could still be a hard topic.
No, that's good. Oh, good.
Yeah, I get your point.
Yeah. So moving back a little bit more broadly about museums, what do you think are the biggest challenges that museums are facing en masse at the moment?
Funding and volunteers, to be honest. People expect a lot for their money, rightfully so with where we are right now. So I don't disagree with that, but understanding that a great interactive exhibit, something that you want to come back and see or to expect turnover in what you see, it's a lot of time. And when you have one person doing it, okay, you get it once a year.
Right.
Like 2 or 3 people, maybe get it twice a year. Maybe you still only get it once a year, depending on how big it is. It's the money needed to pay people enough to work, enough hours, and then you go into all the other stuff, benefits, all this kind of thing. And then to still make your product, the museum, right? Our exhibits and things like that is expensive. And it's more and more complicated because of that funding issue. And then volunteers. So if we're 2 or 3 people working on exhibits, I'm not running the front desk.
Right.
So I have volunteers running the front desk. Those two things cannot happen without each other. So.
And it does seem like the demands or the expectations for museums, along with everything else, has just increased. I mean, you've talked about this in our last episode as well, but it's like, hey, what about video exhibits? What about those immersive experiences? Like that one museum I went to in whatsoever city where I can hear the agricultural and all that. It's hard. It
is. And the creative part is what is the benefit to thinking of those things, because you talk about, it's not a hologram, but it's basically like a projection screen and in a room, and you go, man, I would love that. And somebody goes, well, just do it. And you go, well, I got to find the person to play the part. They got to kind of be historically, visually representative of whoever it is. We were talking about the Lynden department store, and it could be Billy Waples behind the counter. And okay, well, let's go and find somebody from that family. Can we find some content that talks about specific things to where if you're old enough and were part of it, you remember. But if you're young enough, it still lends you to understanding what was going on. And because, you're now shelling out $50,000 to $75,000 on the equipment and the planning and the taping and
So it's not the coming up with ideas that's the problem.
No, it's definitely not the coming up with the ideas part that's hard.
So how do you think museums compare to other non-for-profits with respect to how difficult it is to manage them?
I don't know if you can compare or even put anybody on any type of same level, because the one thing for nonprofits is that everybody has their own mission. They could be a homestead farm and all they want to do is educate kids on how milk is made, and they do tours.
Right.
And it's a family thing and they do it for fun. You've got New Way Ministries. Their mission is completely different. Their participation in their employees and their volunteers is completely different. But they also equally cannot do what they do without them. And most nonprofits are so much more mission related that the people matter 100% of the time. I cannot do my business side without the rest of it. And if I could, well, we wouldn't be on a mission to be doing anything really. So one cannot be present without the other.
Right.
So, but equally so, every nonprofit I've heard having a volunteer issue. Can you find the right staff? Is their skill set where it needs to be? Because you're a smaller company, so they kind of need to be knowledgeable in multiple areas. It's just, I think everybody is having that difficulty of finding the right people for the right part.
So out of curiosity then, because every not-for-profit I've ever talked to, it's the exact same story. It's finding the volunteers first and foremost, and finding funding.
Yeah.
We've talked a little bit about funding in our last episode where it's a lot of networking. It's just being passionate, and that kind of lends itself to fundraising eventually. But how do you find volunteers?
A little bit of luck. But the engagement part about the fundraising, constantly talking about what you're doing. Volunteers are not just senior citizens who are looking for something to do during the day. Some of them, we've got retired teachers that say, hey, I heard you're trying to work on your educational content. I would love to come in. Can I do the school tours? Hey, I hear you're trying to do open houses. I would love to just be part of the activity. It's so multifaceted. And again, by constantly talking to people about what you're doing and where you're going and how you want to get there, you allow yourself to naturally find people who fit in those spots. Sometimes you don't. Sometimes that's just the way it is. Sometimes you just don't find anybody and you get through it and you hope that it gets better and you find a way. But the more generic part is connections.
Right.
And there's boards online you can post where you're saying looking for volunteers for certain things. But the more volunteers that we find is from community connections.
Interesting. And have you noticed that there's like a average attrition rate for volunteers? Like you can usually hold on to them for like a year. They're usually good for maybe as long as you give them snacks.
They would say, sure, give us snacks. But right now, I don't see anything. We have volunteers who have been with us for a couple years, 5 years, 10 years. I think it just dictated by life.
Fair enough.
Where they are, where they want to be. Do they enjoy being with us? Is it accessible to them?
That's got to be a challenge where you're kind of wrangling cats at a certain point.
Always. Not in a bad way necessarily, but you want to make it easy for them because you're encouraging them to constantly come back. So it's managing schedules. Oh, all of a sudden they have a doctor's appointment. Oh, that's okay. We'll find somebody else. And so it's just constant movement and constant fluctuation.
Right. So is there a way that you think that keeping volunteers can be enhanced, whether that's by having like recognition nights where like once a year is just like, hey, thanks for all the help you do. Is there a way that you guys can train them? What are ways that you keep volunteers?
Oh, Showing appreciation is a big thing. They don't necessarily always think that they should get something. They're always very appreciative when we do. So for example, we do not quarterly, 3 times a year, we do breakfasts for our volunteers. So we feed them, they get a little treat. We talk to them about where we're going, give them opportunities to kind of have a say. They see a lot. People talk to them all the time. They're engaged with people. They see things that we might not necessarily see. And so their input can actually make a very drastic difference, making sure that they are aware that we absolutely need them to speak up. But at the same time, that we have to make decisions about some things, and letting them know that the museum's best interest is what our goal is. But a lot of the things that they've brought forward have made changes specifically at the museum that have made a big impact. So they make a difference.
All right. Well, let's move on to a different aspect of museums. So we've talked a little bit about thinking of ideas for things that museums can do. That's not the challenge. The challenge is the funding and the resources.
Yes.
So obviously there's going to be a challenge with keeping up with the times, as we say. But what are some good ways that museums can capitalize on some of the resources they have, whether that's social media or getting out there with a few videos? What are some things that they can do?
So we didn't have a strong social media presence, and I would say even now we still don't necessarily. But for us, it's been engagement toward any type of new graphic. We did new branding, so it's a little bit more appeasable. We restructured how we talk to people, that we're staying consistent with how we're putting that message out, whether it be Facebook, social media, even newsletters, emails, not spamming people, but making sure that they're aware of what's going on and giving at least enough representation out there. So if you miss it the first or second time, you at least catch it the third time. We don't have the opportunity for a lot of video content, mostly because that means that one of us has to put our face on the camera, which isn't necessarily a bad thing. But as we all know, it's a hard thing to get used to. And I even personally struggle with trying to decide where I fall in as a representation face of the museum while still trying to make sure that the museum represents itself in generality, as a history, as a building, as a monument, monumental structure. And so I don't get on social media myself talking to people as often as I probably should, but we're just working in that general direction.
Right. So, like, keeping on the idea with technology, has technology changed the way that the museums are operating? I suppose specifically in your case.
A lot of it is training. The generally senior citizens, the older generation, are the ones who are engaging with people, checking them in. And information is really important to us, especially as a small museum. So not only are we making sure that our check-in area is simple, right? Where you used to tap physical buttons on a credit card machine, right? The little handheld ones, little boxes, to making sure that they're trained and comfortable on an iPad with Square, and how to take a credit card that way is just very different. But also the stats are very important, and making sure that they understand what we do with those, which is on another screen. It's on something that they might have to troubleshoot. Because people have to come in. They don't necessarily have to give us their name, but I want to know how many people are with you, and I want to know where you came from. I need to be able to kind of track that stuff. And between that and training volunteers, and then all the other things that you might have to pay for as a subscription, but ultimately make your life easier.
Right.
And as a business person on the side, people are like, oh, you're so easy to, pay however much money a month. I was like, why? It's way cheaper than if I did it. If I had to do that by hand, if I had to create a process that way, I guarantee you it would be far more expensive to pay me to do that than if I pay monthly for that. And now it's because technically I'm part-time. Technically. I'm not, but I am. But now instead of having a part-time employee, now you have a full-time employee because you're using technology and these other assets as a small company to bridge the gap between what you're physically capable of and what you're actually capable of. And that technology for the museum, whether it be membership systems, things that we use to collect donations, event management, all those things are very important for us to use efficiently because we will need to pay for it, but we need to make sure that it works well enough so it's still efficient. Like you're not getting the bare minimum because you don't want to pay a lot. Guaranteed you're probably still going to be spending time manipulating that to make it work for what you want it for.
I suppose it kind of extends into like that delegation aspect of directing that you made mention of, where technology has enabled us to have so many more tools at our disposal.
Yeah.
Just got to pay our fair share for them.
Well, and a lot of people can get bogged down to understanding what their options are. So obviously the research is very important, but it is probably the most underutilized benefit of our age, I believe. You obviously have to find the right tool for how you operate, but utilizing those in the right way immediately releases some of your workload in more ways than one. And then you get to train people on how to use it, hopefully, in which case now you're magnifying, replicating, and exponentially like supercharging how much work that you can get done because they're using the same tools you are.
Right. So, different aspect of museum directing then. Do you see other museums or historical societies as competition to your museum?
No. So we have, there's us, there is the Sumas Museum, which, very different because they're in a historical home, I believe. I can't remember after the flood, but I'm pretty sure that they are. And then you have the Walker Museum, very different, way more arts. And then you have the Spark Museum.
Yes.
That's there. And I could be like, I could put on a wish list. I could walk into their museums and be like, oh my gosh, this would be great. But the application, even if I bring in what they have, is completely different. And because we're a small town museum, but we're a 30,000 square foot building that's all being used for museum, I can't compare. But I would say it's a good, healthy competition. Not because you want their visitors to come to you or you want to take away anything that you want, but there's more of a level of, what are they using to attract people? And can I implement it here? Okay, well, I'm going to go see what they're doing in terms of like, can I get it?
Right.
Can I get what they get? Can I apply it to what I'm doing? And will it be a benefit to me? So competition wise, maybe that's kind of a little bit more accurate, but not competition wise as in, you're on a sports team and who's going to be more successful.
No, I think that is a better way to look at it, where it's not about taking more of the market share necessarily, because that's even a weird way to frame a lot of non-for-profit work in the first place.
Yeah. And I think it's just like everything else in this world. There is so much opportunity for everything to occur in the same space. And when you work equally, if you understand where your gap is and you learn how to fill that gap, then you're also appealing to a whole different subset of people who are not getting like the other museum or museum activity is not appeasable to them. They're like, oh, well, I did it because I needed something to do, but you brought this into the fold. I'm so glad you did this. I've been looking for something like this before because it's been different or done differently or told differently or whatever the case may be.
Right. So when it comes to running these museums, then do you think it is, like, I think you've alluded to it already, having an active relationship with other museums to see what they're doing, what their challenges are. Do you think it's also a benefit to have those active relationships with city officials, with county representatives?
Oh, yes. I think that any outlook is important because they all play a role in dictating how you get perceived.
Mm.
For the museum world, it's different. It's, as a museum, what we want to represent. How do we want to represent our heritage? How do we want to tell those stories? From a city aspect, from city officials, hey, let's talk about what you're doing. Let's talk about what funding might be available. Oh, grants, they're very specific. So if I'm talking to them and asking them questions, if they're being honest about what the availability is, well, I can manipulate the other part to fit this business financial side that I'm getting information from my city official or representative by. And now the two can coexist where they couldn't before. I'm going to go down this path and I'm going to put this great exhibit together and I'm going to appease the crowd and my community. But I now do not qualify for any funding because I have not done my homework and understood what they're giving money to right now. So I have no access. And one allows me to do more of the other.
Right. It is a balancing act.
Yeah. And it can get kind of complicated, to be very honest. We've tried grant writing. We've done that stuff. It is a very delicate and temperamental world. And the people who are good at it know it. They get it. They get the talk. They walk the walk, like all that kind of stuff. We want to talk about skill sets to find those, gather the information, put together the proposal, get the funding. It's a lot of work.
I thought it was interesting when I first came across the title of grant writer. And seems like an odd kind of job. And then I started applying for different grants because I was going for certain city jobs. I'm here's my proposal. Here's what I could do for you for this kind of grant. And oh boy, each of those take hours.
It's like basically writing a college essay with references and empirical data and all of this. It's like a thesis statement. To be honest. And when somebody comes to me and they say, oh, you guys should go for a grant. And I go, you want to come help me? By all means, I'm happy to come. We still look, but it is not a simple thing. No. At all.
No. And then sometimes you'll look at the grants and it's a huge process. And then like the bursary is $750.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. And a lot of that is appeasable for people who have dynamic programming. So you're hoping that you're looking for grants that you already fall into, right? And the grant world and the lists and the things that you read through is just huge. And a lot of them sound more complicated than they are. But unless you're in that world, you can't figure out which ones those are.
Yeah.
So, and some of them, and then the funding request, right? So if you get money, you have to spend the money within a certain amount of time. And if you have any, you have to give it back. And if there's all these restrictions because they're getting their own funding because they're foundations. And from the business side, that's more helpful. Honestly, when you're talking to somebody about grants and you understand how the business world works on the other side of their grant, to try to explain to people, we're a small town museum. There are things that are just not appeasable to grants, whether in multiple ways. It helps a little bit more to reconcile it in their brain of why you're not doing it.
Right. Well, I've enjoyed this conversation again, Amanda.
Great.
Well, thank you to everyone who's tuned in for another episode of A Businessman's Guide to Almost Everything. We will be coming back in a future episode with Amanda May again, where we will be going over maybe some unpleasant truths that are facing non-for-profits and museums. So we look forward to having you guys back for that episode in the future. Until then, take care and be well.